Title, Gifts Wrapped in Barbed Wire. I was in the middle of a Zoom call when my phone rang. Normally, I would not interrupt a Zoom conversation, but the call was from my physician. There was no way for her to soften the message. Biopsy results were back. The lump in my breast was malignant. What a horrible word, malignant. I was in shock. The R word. When I first heard the diagnosis, I was in shock for several days, basically just walking around like a zombie. When the shock began to lift, I got curious. For many years, I have believed that our bodies often reflect something that's going on in our emotions or our thoughts. So one day I Googled symbolic meaning of cancer. Many words popped up on the screen, but only one jumped out at me: resentment. What? Me? Resentful? Surely not. And then I was flooded with things that annoy me. Could this possibly be resentment? When I asked myself that question, the sound of cosmic laughter reverberated in my imagination. It was not a big stretch to think that all those irritations and annoyances and, yes, resentments could turn into a hard, malignant lump. First medical appointment. When the surgeon walked into the little room, I liked her immediately. For openers, she was female. My rational brain said, surgeons only have to do one thing right: be good at surgery. Gender is irrelevant. I was surprised by how comforted I felt knowing the surgeon was a woman. She walked through the steps that would lead up to and what would happen after the surgery. And then she looked straight at me and said this: just to be clear, she said, our goal is cure, not remission. You're healthy, you're intelligent, you will be fine. Basically, it's 4 months of your life. And that became my mantra. Basically, it's 4 months of your life. Surgery day and comic relief. On surgery day, a lumpectomy, my daughter was caretaker for the day, and in the post-surgery recovery room, I was groggy, still attached to some tubes and bags, and a phone rang. We heard the senior nurse say, I'm not doing that. She's an elderly woman and she's been under anesthetic. No. Long pause. And then we heard, Bonnie Hutchinson. My daughter's eyebrows shot up. She stepped outside the curtain around my bed and said, excuse me, is there something we should know? I was apparently during surgery, some bodily fluid from me had splashed onto one of the medical team members' bare skin. Another blood test and a form were required. I was still too groggy to sit up and fill out the form, so my daughter asked me the questions and wrote down my answers. Question: in the past 6 months, have you paid anyone for sex? No. Question: in the past 6 months, have you been paid for sex? No. Even in my elderly, semi-anesthetized state, I could see that my daughter was trying not to snicker. Question: are you a sex trade worker? No. Question: in the past 6 months, have you had multiple sex partners? And out of my elderly, semi-anesthetized mouth came 2 words: I wish. My daughter guffawed out loud. Next stop, radiation, and 2 more surprises. Like the surgeon, the radiation oncologist was a woman, and again, I was surprised by how comforting it was to have the radiation treatment supervised by a female oncologist. The radiation treatments were scheduled 5 days a week for several weeks, and a second surprise moved me to tears of gratitude. When people found out I was going to have daily radiation treatments, they offered to drive. The biggest scheduling challenge was figuring out who would be least offended if they didn't get asked to drive. There were more volunteers than there were days of radiation. One more surprise and more comic relief. A few days before my first radiation treatment, the radiation oncologist told me about a side effect that nobody else had mentioned. After a few days of radiation, the part of your body that is getting radiated begins to get something akin to a sunburn, and it gets itchy. Yep, itchiness arrived. As everyone knows, if you have some kind of itchy rash, the worst thing you can do is scratch it. That'll just make it worse. And in this case, there was another barrier to scratching. Walk around scratching your boobs in public? Beyond tacky. I sized up the situation. Cancer diagnosis, surgery, healing, radiation, major side effect, itching. On a scale of possible outcomes, like you could die, itching seemed minor. So the most significant impact of my cancer adventure, temporary social inappropriateness if I chose to scratch in public. I joked that I'd try to cope. 5 gifts wrapped in the barbed wire of a cancer diagnosis. In the long version, there are 7 and they each have a paragraph, but here's 5 short sentences. 1, I'm even more grateful for my robust health. 2, I now know that resentment is bad for me, possibly even life-threatening. 3, sometimes gender matters more than I thought. 4, I have never felt so supported in my life. 5, I now believe that when any challenge shows up, the resources to deal with it will also show up. Write Your Way Home. I came into the Write Your Way Home program with a book outline, and the book was going to be my project. But in almost every free writing session, some aspect of my cancer adventure is what popped up to be written about. It wasn't until the request to submit something for the wrap-up booklet that it struck me. The Write Your Way Home program did indeed allow me to write my way home from a life-altering, life-threatening experience. Thank you, Renee.